How y'all doing, folks? This is Oscar with Houston in Action. We're doing some quick tech stuff in the background. Thank you for joining us today. We're also going to be live on Facebook. I ask everyone if you can mute yourselves so before the call gets started, so that way we can give everyone a chance to speak and share their thoughts. We're going to give it a few minutes just for people to log in. If you have any questions or concerns, please make sure to use the chat box option, or for those on Facebook, use the comment option so you can see what we're doing and you can follow along with us. We want to make sure that that we are able to hear everybody as we're presenting, and we're presenting to make sure that we can get some of your input. So thank you so much for joining us today. I might have a bit of music in the background in the beginning. But we are more than happy to be able to support in any way we can. So for all the newcomers, today is Census Monday, beginning of another kickoff of the Census Week. We're excited to have everyone here. Shout out to Armando, Kathy, Carla, and Ruth for joining us on Zoom. If you have a question and you don't mind being on camera, please make the video open. Just a quick reminder that we're also on Facebook Live at the moment. So as you ask questions, you will also pop up on live on our social media feed. That way we can make you Facebook famous. So let's give folks another minute or so to get comfortable, to get started before we jump into our how to host a phone bank. So thank you so much again for joining us. My name is Oscar Hernandez. I'm going to be leading this portion of the training today, and I'm very excited to have everyone on. Hey, look, just ended right with the music. Well, I want to give a shout out to everyone out there in the Facebook verse in the world. I don't have a Facebook anymore, but I'm glad that we were able to connect via Zoom. Shout out to a lot of my friends. Feel free to reach out if you need anything. I know things can be a little difficult right now, especially as we're doing everything with the coronavirus. But we still got a lot of work to do, and we still need to help and support our communities, which is why we're excited to be here today. So for those of you just joining us, today we will be covering around census. We'll be talking about how do we use phone banking systems and some best practices. We're also going to be covering EveryAction, which is the system that we use, and how do we use this system to do specifically our phone banking and sharing our best practices with that. At the end, we'll have some more time to talk about how we can access that through us, through Houston in Action, as we are developing a system and the best process for that. In the meantime, if you do have any questions about phone banking, please make sure to add the questions in the chat option, as well as in the comment section of the Facebook page in the video. All right. One last minute as we get people to come in a little late. Enjoy some of the music. All right, good morning, everybody. This is Oscar with Houston in Action. I am very excited to be here, very excited to be alive, in good health, and to see a lot of y'all's faces joining us this morning on our Community and Action Academy training for phone banking. Today, we're going to be discussing about how you can do it yourself, and as well as how, the different systems and tools that we can use. So for those who have questions and thoughts, for those of you who are joining us via Zoom, please make sure to mute yourself so we can avoid a lot of the background noise. If you have any questions or thoughts, please make sure to add the chat option portion of it. If at some point you want to speak, feel free to do so. Just know that we are also on Facebook Live, and this is being recorded so we can give input. And if you want to share your beautiful faces this morning, make sure to open up the camera. So as we get started, I wanted to make sure that we gave enough time for folks to join us in who might be running a little late. But let's dive in. The first thing we wanted to cover is to go over a check-in question, how we're doing today. So I would like to know, how have y'all used, if y'all have used phone banking in the past, and whether it's a yes or no, please make sure to comment that in the chat section. Mario will be sending me responses to that section. And then if you have used it, what systems did you use? What are the platforms? Did you use Excel sheets? Did you use Google Sheets? Was it just paper form? What are the practices that you've done? Is there a system that has worked specifically good for you? Please make sure to add your responses and your comments on the chat section. And for those on Facebook, also share your best practices. What are the systems that you might have used, or what is the process that has supported you whenever you've done phone banking in the past? And if this is something completely new to you, please make sure to write that in the comments. Our biggest hope is to make sure that we are all collaborating. So if there are people out there who see a newcomer that doesn't not know how to use the systems, that's a great place to catch up and meet with them. Have we got any responses, Mario, from folks? Feel free to send them to me, so that way I can see what other groups I've been using. But yes, I can remember some of the first times I've done phone banking, and we're going to be talking about our best practices in a minute. But I've started phone banking just on paper, and I see folks have talked about using the Voter Action Network and the virtual phone bank, auto dialer, and print call sheets. Yes, the print call sheets can be really useful at some point, but then it's a big pain to move a lot of the paper forms into the data again to save it in the back end. Old school Excel sheets and paper. Yes, that's true. So thank you, Armando, for sharing that. Yes, there are people who still use paper forms to do it, like I mentioned, and we're hoping that maybe what we go through in practice today might support your efforts. So we don't have to, so we can try a different method where it can be a little safer or a lot easier for folks, especially when it comes to saving the data. And Elizabeth, thank you for sharing that you've never used phone banking process before. So I really hope this is helpful to you, very useful to your team. So we're going to dive into the next portion, and Diana, for political campaigns or support of labor rights messaging. Yes, so phone banking is not just around census, it can be used across the board for a lot of different issues as we move forward. So thank you for sharing that as well. So I wanted to cover the agenda, pretty short agenda. We did a brief introduction. Thank you all for participating, for having your comments, and your in the chat as well. We're going to go over, we're going to start off with the do-it-yourself phone banking best practices and how do we use Google Forms and sharing a script. This is a script that we developed that Mario is also going to be sharing on our Facebook page as well as our chat option, so y'all can see the script that we're using, a test scripts that I made for asking questions around census. Then we're going to go into EveryAction phone banking, and we're going to have a portion at the end for Q&A, and then we'll have a next steps. So thank you, everybody. If any questions, make sure to use the chat box. But before we get started, we want to make sure that we go through some of our community agreements and working principles. So for folks who are on Zoom, as well as for folks who are on Facebook, please try to follow these principles and guidelines as much as you can. We want to be able to support everybody. And we want people who are especially joining us on Zoom to be able to say your name before you ask a question if you want to show your face, and or use the audio, or just use the chat option. That way I can keep track of who's talking, who's sharing. We want to give people enough time. We know that there is a bit of a lag between Zoom and Facebook, so we want to make sure people get enough time to ask questions. Also, if I'm going too fast at any point, just feel free to tell me to slow down a bit, or feel free to ask questions as we move forward. If it's a really burning question that might dive in too deep, let's wait till the end for the Q&A section, so that way we can talk about it a little bit more. But other than that, let's get started. So one of the working principles that I want to make sure we cover today is that everyone has a voice, which means respecting every participant's voice and perspective. So that means if someone doesn't like some of the tactics, or maybe it's a no tactics they use, it doesn't work for them, we want to respect everyone's efforts here, and we want to be able to support y'all as much as possible to make it happen. Awesome. Thumbs up, y'all good with that? Thank you. All right, moving on to the next section, which the first thing we wanted to cover is do it yourself in phone banking. So nothing like some high quality H2O. So for when it comes to doing yourself in phone banking, the first thing I want to cover is to make sure that we get our best practices. So anything when it comes to best practices, we want to make sure that the first thing we want to do is consider your audience. So that way, if you're doing a census phone banking, which is what this training is for, that you're considering who you want to talk to. Are you talking to senior citizens? Are you talking to the LGBT community, the Black community, the Latinx community, the Asian community? Is it renters? Like, considering your audience is going to be very important. Creating the script based on the audience is why you have to consider the audience first. And then considering what did the data look like and how you're going to use it. This is extremely important because if you don't consider what the data is going to look like when you develop the script, it might not come out in the way that you want to. And it might be even cause more work in the back end. And how do you make recordings? Training your volunteers is extremely important. We know that phone banking can seem fairly easy, where you can share the document with somebody and they can just follow it step by step. But oftentimes people get a little lost. So this is why it's being able to spend time either in a group to make sure that they know how to follow up, whether it's through Zoom or GChat, to make sure that they get the training they need, and most importantly, have a lot of fun. Yes, phone banking can be fun. I assume that. I guess so many telemarketers calling me that I can't imagine them not having fun all day, every day. But since we're doing it to help our community, it can be especially fun for us. So consider your audience. Now, what I mean by this is, who is your audience? So like really painting a picture of who you're talking to, who you're trying to outreach, and then where they are in life. That's going to support the efforts of even scheduling the best time to call them, because if you're calling moms or people who I know that through COVID things have gotten a little strange, a little more difficult. But if we're thinking about what does it look like to call people janitors who might sleep all day, who have to work at night, consider what is the audience that you're looking at before you develop anything. Because you also might need to develop it in more than one language. And if you need to develop it in more than one language, also consider who are the people that can support you to create the materials in one language. What are the ways that you can frame your questions so your community feels comfortable to answer? Consider this one a lot in a script, and not always intended to be followed verbatim. It is intended for it to be more of a guiding portion of it on how you ask the questions. But you also want to make sure that some of the questions are asked in a way that it's not going to scare the other people you're calling. So you can't just ask right off the bat, like, have you fill out the census? You have to do some introduction, a little bit of work to make sure that people are comfortable and they get to know who you are first. And then in many cases, you might have to explain what the census is as part of the process. And then as you're looking at what your audience is, can you train your volunteers based on this audience? So you also have to consider your volunteers. So if you're trying to look for someone to phone bank within the Asian community, then maybe a lot of your volunteers should definitely be able to speak that language. So that way the audience and the volunteers are not completely detached. The next thing is about creating a script. So the script, we want to be able to start it off with a portion that says a little snippet, a small paragraph that says leaving a message. So that way, if your volunteer calls, they can just read the message portion of it, and then they can leave that as part of the script. Think of the introduction. That is extremely important. You don't want to come off the bat of just saying, hi, how are you doing today? Can I get your information about the census? Like, you really want to think about what is your organization, how you want that person to introduce themselves. Even going as far as saying, hi, my name is blank, would guide the volunteer to remember to always say their name, because that way folks don't feel like they're speaking to a robot, or just someone who might be disconnected, who really doesn't care about them. And remember, you are not an employee of the Census Bureau. Unless you are an employee of the Census Bureau, in that case, welcome. But for most people that we're working with, you're not an employee of the Census Bureau, which we want to make sure that we make that point clear, because the last thing we want, the very, very last thing that can happen when we're making these phone banks is to have our community confused about who's calling them. And then based on your questions, they might even think, well, I already answered the census because somebody called me about it. And that can happen, and it happens a lot. A lot of people are still a little bit confused or lost to what the census is. So making it clear that you're not an employee of the Census Bureau is going to help you guide those questions and conversations. And then ask them to take a pledge. Will you take a pledge to fill out the census? Make that part of the questions if you want to, or you can add the questions that are better suited from your organization about how you're tracking them if they're not taking a pledge. And then include census referral. We always want to refer people to the census hotline that Houston in Action has created, as well as the Census Bureau. So if they have any specific questions, they can talk directly to the Census Bureau. So data is extremely important, as y'all already know. And one thing to consider, a big thing to consider about data, especially as I saw people who talked about spreadsheets and paper forms or Excel, is what does the data need to look like when it's being reported? So if you wanted to show like who the people you contacted and how you connected with them, so you can think about your best practices. So that's why the script and the audience is extremely important before you think about what the data is, because if in the data end, you need to be able to track, is it best to text them, call them, or is it best to leave a message? You want to make sure that questions are in the script as part of the training as well. And then making sure that when there's a response that you have a good way to track it. So it doesn't become a convoluted thing where it might actually get a lot more work and trying to put all the backend data into a system that can give you your best practices. Are you using a system with firewalls? Now this is extremely important. So if you use Google spreadsheets or Excel, they're generally not the safest place to store your data, especially when it comes to like confidential information, because sometimes it can be extremely accessible to outside sources. You might leave your computer open somewhere, and if you have your email open, someone might be able to get this data, and we want to be as careful as possible. So if you do use those forms, make sure that you're taking the necessary precaution to ensure that that data is not accessible to anyone outside of your network. If this means like making a nice safe folder, putting in a specific place within your drive or within your Outlook, make sure you take those precautions on your end so other people don't have access to this data. That's going to be really important. And then who has access to your data? It's like within your team, who needs it and who doesn't, especially if volunteers are using a spreadsheet or a form like that. If they have access to see that data, you might want to have to go back there regularly to make sure they no longer have access as they come in and out of participating. But if you're using a data system, make sure that that data system that you're using only allows them the access that you want them to help you participate in phone banking, because sometimes people have more than access than they need. And what ends up happening is that folks will ultimately can make mistakes, and that's what we're trying to avoid, those mistakes that can really damage the program. So always ask yourself, is your data secure? Is my data secure? Like if it's secure, and if it's not, what do I need to do in the back end to make sure that only we have access to it? Another thing to as we're training and developing the phone banking is how do you train your volunteers? Making sure that the training is easily understood, that they can follow it through step by step, going through maybe a couple of tests phone banking with the volunteers in your membership once or twice to make sure that they get the hang of it and to become a lead in the space. Do you need volunteers to support you in creating the script? This might actually be really helpful if you work with a specific community and your volunteers are representative of that community. Then you should probably ask them, how would you answer the phone call? Does this question make sense for you? And then that way they can help you guide the best way of framing the questions so the community can respond. Looking through the systems that you're using, making sure that your volunteers understand the process. If your volunteers need to track their hours, then making sure that you can track the hours and who inputted the data and then what data was inputted and when, so that we know which volunteers got how many calls. Can you keep track on the calls? Do your volunteers have the same values as your organization? That's an extremely important question to ask yourself, if your volunteers have the same values as your organization, because we want to make sure that they're also respectful, that they're participating in the space, and that they can see themselves by participating to the phone bank, that this is an enormous amount of support that they can give to the community. And most importantly, have fun. So phone banking can be a lot of fun. Sometimes you end up talking to people. It's not a good habit to stay on the phone for an hour with a stranger sometimes, but so I try my best not to do it. But that's happened to me once or twice when we just talked and the lady was super friendly. But then I had to tell her I need to make all these other calls. So don't have too much fun to where you only make 2 phone calls in a day. But definitely try your best to make it as interactive as possible, even through COVID, as we are working within our homes and in very distant places. Being able to take screenshots of the phone bankers and everyone shares it together might encourage people. Having a competition between volunteers who can get the most phone calls out there could win a virtual prize. Keep a positive, I always try to keep a positive sense of humor no matter what I'm going through, so do your best. Because a lot of times most people will not answer the phone, although nowadays most people will probably be home and be available. So this might be one of the best tactics and tools that you get to use, especially right now. And use the hashtag #HTalkCounts as people get responses and questions that you might have, so that way we can follow it and we can be able to support from our end. So let's jump into the actual do-it-yourself training. Now, this portion is also important because we're using some of the same materials for EveryAction. So as we move forward, one of the first steps after you consider your audience, developing a script. So when you develop a script, fingers up if you can see, a thumbs up, sorry, if you can see the screen. So this is a script that was developed. Yes, no fingers up, just thumbs up. Okay, awesome. So this is a script that was developed for testing phone banking. There is an English person on top and then a Spanish one at the bottom. So we're starting off again with leaving a message. So if I called somebody and I was like, hello, hello, and it would say their name if I have their contact information. So I'd be like, hey, Josh, I'm Oscar, and I'm calling with Houston in Action, or the name of your organization. Calling with Houston in Action is part of the city of Houston and Harris County Yes to Census campaign. We are not employed by the Census Bureau. We are calling to ensure that everyone is aware that the 2020 census count has started and that you can fill it out from the comfort of your own home. If you have any questions about the census or need assistance, something specific on the census, please feel free to call our hotline at 281-305-8300. That is our census hotline for Houston in Action. But being able to leave a message and leaving them an opportunity to follow up might be a really good way for them to get the information that they need. So consider, what do you want the voicemail to sound like? The second thing is, out of the voicemail is, again, repeating the process for when they do pick up. So when they pick up, again, you start your introduction. For this one, the changes where we talked about the census has begun. As early as March 12th, people who would have received a letter with instructions on how to complete the 2020 census, and we are calling to ensure that you can get counted by completing the census for your household. On March 12th, the U.S. Census sent out 2 types of invitations for you to complete the census. A letter inviting you to ask to respond online on paper form that you can complete and return via mail for your household up to 9 people. You can also use either the online form or the paper form, and you can also complete the census by phone. So there's a number of ways that people can answer. Remember that there's 3 ways people can answer: online, paper, or by phone. Now, what makes it tricky when doing a phone bank is being able to collect the data of who the people that you called and talked to. So if you already have a long list of people's names, then you might just need to add the question portion at the end. But if you want to make sure that people are transferring the questions and then they get the right person, because you might ultimately call someone, they will be able to, they might be able to go through the, sorry, you have to verify that that's who they are. So you would have to ask some contact information in order to do that, and which would be like first name and last name. It's also for reporting purposes. It might be a good idea to separate these 2, so that way the data could come out and look in the back end. Email address and whether or not they answer the call. And we're going to go through this a little bit more in details on how it looks different from EveryAction to our actual Google form. So the first question we have in here is, do you have, once you receive your invitation to respond, how likely are you to complete the census within 3 days? Not likely, undecided, likely, or it's completed. Then this is like a lean in portion where we want to make sure that people are comfortable with the following questions. This is also in case your organization needs to require specific information about them that you're not sure if they're going to be comfortable responding. So giving them the opportunity, if it's optional or not, might help them out. So you make the next questions a little bit more comfortable. But the second question is, can we count on you to talk to friends and family about the upcoming census and its importance? And this is a yes or no question. So that way you can track whether it's a yes or no. The third one is, do you have concerns about the census? And this is a paragraph question. So this might be open to your volunteers. So if they do have concerns, they can literally write it in. The fourth one is, would you like someone to follow up with you to see if you need assistance and complete the census? And that'll be yes or no. Now, the reason it's important to track some of these questions again is that if someone from your organization needs to follow up with them, this would be a great question to add. So when you review the data, you know who in your group needs to call them. There are also questions about asking them to take the pledge. There's questions about asking folks to participate in the census online. That if you have how many people live in their households question. That is a census question, but I'm not sure if that's something your organization generally asks. Like, there are different ways that you can get some of this context to help support them. And then remember the closing line. So great, again, this one says that we'll follow up with people within 48 hours. We'll go through the process inviting people to the HoustonAction.org. So for more information, they can also call our hotline at 281-305-8300, or they can call the Census Bureau at 1-800-932-8282. So there are many ways to go through this. So one of the questions we had from Francisco is the phone number of the United States Bureau to take the census questionnaire by phone on the script. Yes, it's right at the end of this script, or we're giving it to folks, the 1-800-923-8282. There is a specific number that ends with 2020, which is where actually the form, you can fill it out over the phone, and I'll make sure to share that with everyone at the end. But this is just for general questions for the Census Bureau. I do encourage people, we want to encourage people to the right information. The Houston Action website has virtual events that people can participate if they need more assistance from someone local. The Bureau is definitely where everyone should be sending people so they can fill out the Bureau. So giving them the Bureau information is extremely important, so making sure people get counted. As well as the hotline if they wanted something more specific. More specific to a local area is what I mean by that, because the Bureau is the place that's going to be helping them count them. And the next thing I wanted to cover was what does it look like on spreadsheets. So let's say you develop this script, right? And then after the script is developed, you want to be able to track like responses from people. So this is the spreadsheet is very similar to an Excel, but the questions up here are the questions that we just went through. Did they answer? Yes. If this could say no, if they didn't answer, it could say left a message when you responded. Once you have received the invitation, how likely are you to respond? Likely. Can you respond? Now, the important thing right here to add is if you want this to be limited to specific actions. So if you just leave a spreadsheet like this open and don't give guidance to a volunteer, did they answer the call? They might write yes, no, they might write maybe, they might write left a message. But if you need them to follow a specific guideline to be like, if they did not answer, just put no. But if you left the message, write left a message. If they did answer and asked you to call them back later, then write call back later. So that way you can have a specific guidelines for every single question. This will help you track what's coming out, how the reporting will look like in the back end for this. Do you have any concerns about the census? Someone wrote in citizenship questions. This is important because if you can read the different concerns that people might have. And would you like for someone to follow up with you? They look yes. So you can actually call back Elvis, be like, hey, great, Elvis, fill it out. And using the spreadsheet, again, it's good, but this is also, you have to consider the safety reasons, the access to the people that have it. So because this is a Google document, this will tell me like who has access or not, and I can actually remove people or change, because currently this is public for y'all to view it. But I can change it so I can take out volunteers if like I'm done with a portion of this and I don't want people to have access to it. But another risk you run by using this is that someone can legitimately copy and paste all this data. So we want to be as safe as possible. So if you're using Google Sheets, make sure that you have a non-disclosure agreements with volunteers. Make sure that you have the necessary guidelines so people are not taking the data that you're using from your system. If there are any questions, please feel free to add them in the chat, and I'll be more than happy to respond. And for those who've never used Google Forms before, this is what it looks like in the back end. Now, essentially, what you can do is develop a Google form that this is what people will see when they fill it out. Now, the reason we put questions like their first name, last name is because you also want to track who you're calling. So if you have a database of like, I don't know, 2,000 people, and you already have their phone and email and this contact information, and then you send that database to a volunteer to support you with it, they can literally just write in the information from the database first. And then when it says, did they answer the phone call? Yes, no, move, wrong number, or other. The really cool thing about Google is that it has an other portion where you can type in something. So if you're responding it looks like this, and you can write in other. That's the way. Actually, that's a sad one. Let's not do that one. But let's just say that there was another option and you wanted them to fill it out. And the way I have it here is that I have it split out into different factions. So in Google Form, you start up with a description. For those who've had like never before have they used Google Form, you could find this in your Drive by going through your Drive, and you'll be able to access you'll be able to access a Google Form slide. It's just as simple as going into your Drive, putting new, and then going to more, and you can open a Google Form. And it'll tell you the kind of forms you want to do, and you can start with a blank one. And when you do a blank one, you remember the title, the description, and literally writing in the questions. But what I did was I took the initial script we went over a moment ago, and in that script, I just copied the script and I inputted it here. So it follows the guidelines from the first script we covered. So everything that's on here was just transferred to here. And I always recommend to do it on paper first before you put it anywhere else, just because it's a lot easier to edit here. So once you got their contact information, figured if they answer the call or not, the first question is how likely they are to answer within 3 days. Then we have the lead-in portion where we want to make sure that people feel a little bit more comfortable. Would you like someone to help you respond to the questionnaire? No, yes. And then the thank you and closing. And the closing, again, has contact information for the Census Bureau as well as our hotline. And this can also include for your volunteer to remind people that they can call your organization if they have any questions. So the way this looks like as well is if somebody responded in the back end, the really cool thing about Google Forms is that it can actually chart things for you. It can say the name of people who came in. If you're tracking who your volunteers are, you might actually add the question as the name of the volunteer who's filling it out, and then they can go through the portion of going through. Then in the back end, you'll be able to track what the reporting looks like from that volunteer, who are the people who filled it out. This has, like, depending on how the questions, whether it's check boxes or multiple choice, it will develop either pie charts or graphs, so you can see who responded and what kind of responses they had. So the question portion is really good. I'm gonna jump back to it really quick. If you wanted to add a new question, you press the plus sign, and then within it, you write in the question. How are you doing today? After you write in the question, you could write a short answer, a paragraph, multiple choice, check boxes, a drop down. You can even allow them to upload a file. Everything here in the bottom, it depends on what you're trying to do in terms of scaling it. Feel free to play out with it. If you're asking about the date, you can respond to date or a time. So being able to follow this would be extremely helpful into how you guide those questions. And then if you want to save the question, another thing to remember is that this required portion right here, if you turn it on, it means that people can literally not submit or move on to anything without answering this question. Currently, everything is off. That's only because we want y'all to be able to test it. Otherwise, you would not be able, you would not be able to go through the entire form without submitting it. But I added the question, how are you doing today? I just save it, and then I can reload this one. Reload. And the first question again is, how are you doing today? And that's because that question was at here. And this one says question option 1. This was a mistake. You could see it here on the form. So I could just delete it, trash can, boom, and it's gone. Now if I reload it, it's no longer there. But one thing to consider is that you want to get it right the first time, because if you make any edits, the responses are going to change. It's going to look a little funky. And if you do have a system where you pull out Excel forms, you can literally turn this into a spreadsheet by clicking on here on View Responses on Sheets. You click on that, and it will turn it into an Excel sheet. So that way you can see the responses of the person who answered. Okay, I have a question, I think. Do you have a sample standard non-disclosure statement to use for Google Forms? Yes, we can definitely. It's not. I don't have it as part of this presentation, but we can put something together. If that's something that is helpful, we're more than happy to follow up. We have something that we use for our canvassers and our volunteers as their phone banking from their homes. We also have. A question is, can the spreadsheet be password protected? So that's going to depend again on who you give access to. So if you're using a spreadsheet, it's who you give access to. So folks cannot log in to view the spreadsheet. They can just only view it if they have access to Google and if you give them access to the document. So you won't necessarily be able to track like who's making it. Who's in here. But usually on Google, right next to help or even the folder, there's this thing that tracks who's making edits. And that way, if folks make edits, you can even go back in time and check out what are the edits that were done before. You can view the history of the edits, and you can view who made those edits. Another thing to do that on Google Docs that doesn't really work for spreadsheets is you can also track people who make suggestions versus changing the information. Is the phone number? Let me see if I think we answered that question. And keep the question coming. By the way, any questions you may have, Mario will make sure to send them to me so I can read them. But this is what it looks like in a Google form, and it's a pretty simple document. But always consider how the data looks like in the back end, because if you're going to move the data from the spreadsheet or an Excel sheet into a system that you're currently using, you have to make sure that that process works well. Otherwise, it's going to end up really messy, and it can mess up with the whole platform. So consider that as you're using the Census as you're developing these tools. So that's it for the spreadsheet, the scripts, and the Google form. We're actually going to jump into what I think a lot of people are also excited to hear, EveryAction. So before we get started, let me just also make it clear that for those who have used the Voter Access Network or the VAN, this is the same system, but EveryAction isn't look identical like that. So you have knowledge on VAN, you might have all the knowledge acquired that you need for the system. So I'm gonna only, for purposes of this training, we developed a lot of dummy data because the last thing I wanted to do is put someone else's contact information on our website, and so everyone can see it. So whatever you see here is not actual data from people. This is just data that we put in here for the necessary of this training. So once you can log in, for those who have access to EveryAction, when we're looking at what we want to do, which if you go all the way at the bottom, it says Quick Tax Virtual Phone Banking. You would think that that's where you need to start, but it's not. The first thing we need to do is similar to we went through the process as before. We want to be able to make a script and add the questions. So there's multiple ways of doing this. If you go under the little hamburger here, you can actually go all the way down until you get to scripts. And once you click on the script portion of it, you'll be able to access how to make a script. So click on this. Now these are scripts that I made and created, put together for this. So you can search old scripts that you've made already, or you can create a new one. So if you wanted to create a new one, you press Add New. You would name it. I'm gonna put 3. You can add a description, and then you press Next. Now, once you press Next, this will pop up right here. And I'm actually gonna go back so you can see how it looks like once it's completed. So this is the same thing. After you press Next and you named it, you put a description, Census phone banking demo script for the train partners and members. Status is active. I'm using a demo version. That's why it says owner committee, which is the committee that I own. And then underneath that, it gives you an option to do linear or branched. We're focusing on linear today because just to go into the process. But this is, like I mentioned, the same script that we use that we develop for everything else. So as we can see the script that we have here, let me see, where's the script? Let me pull the script up one more time. Move right here. So as we can see, the same script that we developed both in English and Spanish here, it's inside our EveryAction. So it starts with leaving a message. Now this has a split, just so it's the top section where we want people to leave a message in case no one picks up. And we can split, well, I'll get to that in a bit. And then at the bottom, it will have a Spanish portion. So that way it has English and Spanish. And then if they do answer, then this is the second portion, is the answering the phone call. So that's where you, hi, my name is blank, I'm calling from Houston in Action, or your organization's name. And you follow the script step by step, just as we developed it in the doc. Underneath that is the first survey question. Once you have received your invitation to respond, how likely are you to complete the census within 3 days? And it's literally the same question, third, fourth, and fifth, and it has 6 survey questions in the process, which is the service question. And we'll go over how to add the questions in a bit. But I wanted to make sure that we saw the script together, and we're going to jump back to this. And at the end, it says, thank you for your time. And again, it's both in English and in Spanish. And then you want to save the order. Now, when you're making a script, it gives you the option to add the script here in English and then add something in Spanish. But first, you have to add the English, and then at the bottom, you would include the Spanish, and then you would press add. And once you press add, it will save it up to here, and you'll be able to move it into which direction you want to. And by that, I mean, what do you want? Go first, second, third, how do you want the script to look like? So you made the script, right? Let's say you finalize, you have all the language, you made the script. Next thing you want to do, before we press save, when it says phone results, these are different ways to track if people moved, if they left message, so be able to check like the responses on it. So is the person deceased, the phone call get disconnected? Do they want to do not call? Do not call just simply means that in case you wanted to go canvassing, someone can still go canvassing, but it says don't make a phone call. Wrong number is important if they wanted Spanish. Just a lot of these different things that you click have different implications. So make sure that that before you decide to select any one of these, that you understand the implications for the walkthrough. And then you press save, and then after you press save, it's gonna add it. It's added right here because it's already saved, and it's part of my list. So now that I created a script, the next thing I want to go through again is come back to the left and go where it says survey questions. Now to add a survey questions, these are the questions that I put down as that I already have on the script. But if you wanted to add a new one, you go to the cycle, and for cycle we're gonna add 2020 because that's the year we're doing it. Type, we're gonna add miscellaneous just so because it's around census and it's gonna be tagged to everything we do. There's a long name for this one, so this one could be pledge. Pledge to and see, and it has a limited amount of words, so it wouldn't allow me to fill everything because this is just a long version of it. So you want to stick it pledge to census. And in Spanish, I'm going to copy it the same, English and Spanish. Medium name might be PLE pledge. I'm going to put the same thing in Spanish. Mario, feel free to add any questions that I'm getting so that way I can follow up with people. And then as you're using the system, it will add for different variations of it. So a short name could be PC, pledge to census. And then the questions. Can you go pledge the census? Here we go. Does HIA require us to ask certain questions? So that depends on the funding stream that you're getting for folks who are participating, and we can break that off as we see who wants to use EveryAction and what the process would look like. We're still developing that, and we'll talk about that towards the end. So I know that folks even asked like how do you get access to EveryAction for their organization. We're developing that process, so we are reaching out to people this week and next week to give access to people as we're developing the process for that. We'll likely be calling faith organizations, customize the script accordingly. So can we dedicate one of the standard scripts, then customize it? Yes, so we can develop a standard script, but a lot of it also is going to depend on what data needs to be collected, and then you can customize the script on what makes sense to you. We'll have like a standard script to support you, something you can work off of, and everything else you can edit. And if you need more stuff than we need to collect, then you can figure out the best process to do that. So now that I wrote in the question, I'm going to skip the Spanish version just to make this a little quicker. It's active, visible by committee, only people with access, which is this one, and then I'll press save. Now after I press save, it's gonna give me an option at the bottom. Yes. See. So it fills it out automatically for a response, English and Spanish. So if I put yes, response, medium, and short, I'll have the response there. And then this allows me to give access to any group I want to get this access to the questions. But for the purposes of today's training, we're just going to save it. And now that question is here, pledge to census. So whenever I want to add this question, I just add it to the pledge to census. But this tells me all the survey questions that I put together. So now I created a script, then I created the survey questions. Now it's time to put those two together. So we go back to the script portion of it. And I'm going to open the census. And then here we go, where we can add the questions that we have. So let's say I wanted to add a survey question. The only question that I haven't added yet is the pledge to census. So I would pledge to census. I would add yes. And it will put it in line for me. But because it's the last thing I did, it put it at the bottom. But I can literally drag it to be the question after if they would need someone to follow up with them. So now it's saved. Now that that's now it's in order that I wanted to. I could press save order, so it keeps track of this order. So that way, in case I refresh or anything happens, it will work out that way. Then I press save, and now it's updated. So if I needed to see it again, the new question is there: survey question, pledge to census. Okay, step number 2 is done. Script, survey questions, and then survey questions added to script. Now we're going to go back home. And after we go back home, before we can make any kind of virtual phone banking, first thing we need to do is create a list. So lists are who are the data that you have in the system. And by clicking create a list, what you're doing is you're pulling out the data of everyone in this system that you want to reach out to. Now, the first thing that we suggest is to remove all suppressions. This is just to make sure that all the data that's in here is accessible. So suppressions, what it does is that if somebody had passed away or someone had do not call, anything they might have marked on them, it would remove them. But by taking remove all suppressions, it would just include them so we can see that data. Address, we're going to focus on the state of Texas. And then home district. And here, because we put state of Texas, we're going to go Texas and we're going to go county, Harris County. Now, a big thing to remember is you can actually preview what this data might look like by pressing preview my results, and it generates 39 contacts. Now we know there are way more than 39 contacts in Harris County, but this is again dummy data for us to be able to view today. But the good thing about EveryAction as well is that you can divide it by activist codes if you wanted to have like volunteers you're reaching out to, or leaders or donors. You can go through whether they answered by email, who their employer or their occupation looks like. It has questions around ethnicity. So you can literally go through, I'm looking for 18 to 24-year-old Asians, and by clicking on ethnicity, and you can also go to age range, you'll be able to target that specific community within Harris County. But because again, this is dummy data, for the purposes of this, we're gonna run a search. And now our data is going to come onto here. Typically, I would never share this data, but none of this data is real, so we're good. But the way this looks like is after you made the search, I'm going to show you, if you go to My Lists, This is the data that just came out. You will press calls, this little phone button. So this phone button is extremely important because now you are setting up the data system to make call people. So after you input the data in here, the system, you're gonna click the phone, and the phone is gonna say set up virtual phone banking list. Next. So these are two really cool options that it has it here. Oh, we have a question about the spreadsheets. I'll get to you in a second. But these are two really interesting options that EveryAction does. The first one says use this static list fixed for set people, and the second one is use this as my search criteria. So static means if I only wanted to contact these 39 people from this category, I click use a static list. But if I want to say criteria, which means that only people in Harris County who this list can grow depending if more people move into Harris County and my list gets bigger. So the one is based on the people on the list, and the other one is based on criteria on the search. You can add this into a new folder, you can name it, and then you can press save, or you can only use based on this list. But I'm gonna go just based on these 39 people. Now, once that is done, what it looks like, calling around, virtual phone banking details. So I already created this information. I do not want to create it again, but essentially all this will be filled out in terms of how we put it together. And the way to access it on the back end, I'm gonna go back to home really quick. We're going right back to the same document we went to before, where it says administrative menu under phone services is gonna say virtual phone bank. And under virtual phone bank, I have Houston and Action's phone banking, Census phone banking. This is for our training today. And this is the same format as the other one that we just left, but filled out. So here, Houston and Action Census phone bank is the title. The script that we're using, again, based on what we worked together today, is this script, the set date. So I made it started yesterday, and this is very important. If you're having a phone banking tomorrow, and you actually put it for the 31st, then you won't be able to see it or share it until tomorrow. So if you want people to test it and view it the day you're working on it, then make sure that it's available that day. Now I gave this phone banking till June, but you can ultimately extend the date even further or make it shorter. If it's happening in a week, you only want people to have access for a week, then you can make it for that week. Now, the really important thing to do here to acknowledge also is that this also has a published to open VPB. VPB means virtual phone bank. Now, if you make a public, what it allows you to do is to create this awesome little number. So this is the website where somebody, I have access to EveryAction. So if you have a volunteer, they would really log in. And once they log in, they'd be able to see the contact information. I could not reach normal, left the message, and it will be able to follow the script, which means that they do not need to log into your EveryAction. They can just become a user by writing in their email and creating a password, and then you'll be able to know who is the volunteer who logged in to see this data by simply sharing this. So this is a really cool option for folks who do not want to give long logins to a lot of, if you have 50 volunteers, using this will help you completely to make sure that, that folks are followed up with and that your volunteers have access to this data. Now, as you're going through the process, one thing I do want to remind us, at the bottom of this, because there is a note section whenever we made the script, you want to include the note section so people can type a response. Unfortunately, EveryAction, unlike Google Spreadsheets, does not let you to write in a paragraph response. So make sure that you're writing in the note section so folks can have an option to take notes, because you will not be able to have paragraph responses through EveryAction questions, but that's what the note section is there for. So when it goes to households, we put show all also in households. The reason for this is that you might have the contact information for Mary or David, and then you call in and you say, hey, is David there? And like, no. And then if you show Mary's there, what would happen is that right beside Norma, it would have another tab that says, oh, David also lives here. And then that way folks can say, well, is David there? And then say, oh, yes. Mary's not home, but David's here, and blah, blah. They can go through the script. You also want to be able to allow skipping. This is important in case somebody gets to a phone call and they just didn't make that phone call, or they wanted to contact someone else. This way they don't fill it out incorrectly. You allow them to skip so they can go to a next call. And this is as simple as looking into the next person or the next person as you're following through. So it'll go into the process, and all you have to do is press skip, and it goes to the next person. That means that that person was not followed up with, and then they wanted to talk to somebody else. It says who was created, who do I share it with, and then once all this is finalized, you can press save. I want to also keep in mind that this right here is a code that is linked specifically to this. This is if folks were going to log into EveryAction and use EveryAction as the formidable database to make these phone calls, then they would log in, use this code, and then they'll find this phone banking system. And once that's done, ultimately, it's just we're going back home. We go to a virtual phone bank, and we're ready. Sorry, wrong place. Oops. So now you're finalized. You're finished. What this looks like, now you click on virtual phone bank. If you're using your own login as an EveryAction user, you write in the code here, or it will be saved up here like I saved it, which is Houston in Action Census Phone Bank. You press next. Next, it says welcome to the virtual phone bank, and then boom, same process. Now notice that this and this are essentially the same tools. This has all the accessibility in the back end that you need in order to make this phone banking, to make edits, anything you want to use. So this is more for admin, this is more for staff, or the really lead volunteers that you have, that they need accessible to that. Everyone else using the website will be able to contact people through this option. And when one person fills it out, as you'll notice, if I talk to Wilma, then Wilma will be removed from the volunteers list because they already got followed up with. And then once all this is done, in the back end, the data is going to be reported into the EveryAction system. There are ways to export, and there are ways for you to see the data to see how that reporting is going to look like based on this question. But those are going to be left for another day in training, because those are a little more, not in the weeds, but a little more trickier in how to go through the process. So I want to go back to the questions before we move forward that we had here. We had a question about, here we go, from Kathy. Am I understanding that each organization will have their own spreadsheets? So if there's a question about spreadsheets, again, if you're using spreadsheets, I wanted to make this training more accessible to people who this is their first time making a phone call. So spreadsheets is an option if it's something that makes sense for you. I did highlight all the what do you call it, the issues that might come up with that. So if different organizations are using different spreadsheets, just make sure that it's safe, make sure that it has accessibility. This isn't a requirement that we're putting for people. This is also understanding that there are a lot of small organizations that might not have access to different tools and different data systems. So if they are using a spreadsheet, or if they've never used them before, just keep in mind, make it as safe as possible, make sure that people cannot run away with your data. Another question was, what are the activist codes? That's a really good question. So activist codes is how you track people. Think of it like this. So for Volunteer Houston, if you have staff, if you have volunteers, if you have people that are leaders within the space, you can literally track them through that activist code. And you write in an activist code, and that activist code, whenever you want to make a search and you write, I want to track who all our volunteers are, you go to activist code, you click on volunteers, and all the people who have been tagged within activist codes of the volunteer would show up in the list. So that goes when you're making the profile for people and how you're also registering people to different events. Now, before we move on into anything else, I want to make sure we cover a couple of things before we go into Q&A. One, especially for folks on Facebook, thank you for joining us again. This is a training on phone banking and how some of our best practices, but also know that the Census Bureau has a lot of different support for folks. If you want to respond to the census, these are the numbers you should look into. For English, it's 1-844-330-2020. Spanish is 844-468-2020. Typically, all of them will end with the 2020 when you're making a call to respond to answer the census questions. So please feel free to share. We'll also be sharing it on our Facebook. So if you don't see this, or if you want more access, we'll be sharing it through there. Houston in Action also has a hotline. So if you want to get connected with folks locally, 281-305-8300. We have currently operators in Urdu, Arabic, Vietnamese, Korean, Mandarin or Cantonese, Spanish, and English. These are local organizations who are going to be able to support and help you if you have any questions around census. But I did want to open it for Q&A. For those of us both on Facebook and online, if you can do me a huge solid favor, this will support us in how we're doing the trainings better for people. If this was helpful, if it wasn't, how we can improve. This is case sensitive, but if you go to bit.ly, that's bit.ly/P banking census, that's lowercase b, banking, census. And Mario, if you can please include that in the chat option in our Facebook. It will help us a lot if you respond to that to see how these trainings were helpful, if they weren't. But I want to open it up for questions too, if y'all want to either ask a question or type it into the spreadsheet, into the chat box or the comment section on Facebook. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions or thoughts you may have.
Hey, Oscar, this is Nabila with Engage. I just wanted to give a quick update on those phone lines. Thank you for sharing them. But what we have heard from folks that have been trying to access those phone lines is that they are having some delays in the Census Bureau. So, so one of our Engage National folks reached out to the Census Bureau and they did respond to us. And because of COVID-19, they're just getting a lot of delays, especially in those other languages, not English and Spanish so much. So when you try calling them, it might be a little bit difficult right now. So I think it's really important we push our own census hotline number, because those other languages, from at least from our subscriber base, we've been hearing that they are not being as good as we'd like for them to be in terms of answering the phone calls. And it's really just the Census Bureau is working on it right now, trying to figure out what the delays are and trying to make sure that they have that taken care of.
Thank you so much, Nabila, and thank you for that important update. And yes, there is a lot of delays to the Census Bureau at the moment. Everyone is dealing with COVID as much as we are. So again, I'll share our hotline number again at 281-305-8300. Thank you, Nabila, and a big shout out to Engage and ECI for supporting a lot of the different languages that we're getting through here. So like Nabila said, calling this hotline has a lot of local help for people. If you have questions around the census, we'll have people who'll be able to guide you through the process and what you need to do to answer them. And keep in touch, going through our website at houstinaction.org. You'll be able to get more contact and information. But thank you, Nabila. Does anyone else have a question so far?
Sorry, it's me again, Oscar. So we're going to be using our own personal EveryAction. So the process should be the same, correct? Like for using in our own personal database, what you showed us?
Yeah, and for partners and members who are using their EveryAction, we can figure out the best process to make sure that that we have for data. But we can follow up separately for that. But thank you, Nabila.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and then it's the great thing about EveryAction, and maybe depending on the civis, which are a lot of like data terms, but it's more like there are ways that the systems can talk to each other, which makes the data reporting even a lot easier between organizations. But please fill out the bit.ly one last time before we close off. I have the next steps and how we can connect with this. So again, it's bit.ly/P banking census. So that way we'll be able to support you in the best way we can, and we can improve our trainings to make sure you're accommodated. So next steps. So the process for EveryAction, if you're if you have questions for this, know that we're developing it. For folks who are part of our outreach funding and who are doing county work, make sure to follow up with Anna with Houston in Action, Chris at Houston in Action, and for the organizers especially, I'm going to support with any access that we will need for this. For just emailing me at Oscar@HoustonInAction. This will be us to develop a process, maybe MOUs, best practices, and what needs to develop for folks who need access to these systems. We just know that we are working digitally. We are working really hard. My English is not very good looking, like Celia Cruz used to say. But we want to make sure that that we give folks the best tools that they can do the best work that they can. This is Census Week. For more information on Census Week, please go to houstonaction.org/Census Week and use the hashtag HStompCounts if you want to have more, follow everything that's happening online. Shout out to all the organizers and the outreach partners this week who are going to be working really hard to make sure that our community is aware of the census, bringing it up as much as possible, sharing videos, Facebook Live events, having any more questions. So please check us out, check all the events at houstonaction.org/Census Week, and use the hashtag HTownCounts to follow up with all the events that are happening locally. But that's it for me from my end. I want to thank everybody for your patience, for your time, for your questions. I really hope this was helpful to you. I am becoming little by little every action expert, so I hope to be able to support you more and more as we get this learning. But thank you, all of you, for coming in today. I'll take some final questions if there's any. Otherwise, we can close off. And thank you, folks on Facebook. Have a wonderful, beautiful day. Remember, it's Monday. I guess you don't need to remember that, but it is Monday. But remember, it is Census Week, and that we will be doing a lot more amazing work, and that our partners and our friends will also be doing a lot of amazing work in the community. So keep an eye out for all the Facebook Live videos. Keep an eye out for all the Zoom videos and all the calls. Make sure that participate as much as you can, and we'll catch you next time. All right. Thank y'all. Take it easy.